and welcome to this edition of Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray. How are you?
Very good, Keith. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. And we've got a good friend with us today. Ray, why don't you introduce him?
We sure do. Mick Wiest is with us today. I've known Mick for a number of years. We worked together out at Y12. And also Mick is the executive director of the Oak Ridge Heritage and Preservation Association. But today we're going to ask him to focus on growing up in Oak Ridge. He has a unique experience and an unusual story to tell us, especially when we focus around the time when we came very close to having nuclear war, and see how that affected Mick in Oak Ridge. Mick, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well, thank you, and thanks for having me today.
Sure. Right, and folks may recognize Mick because both he and Ray were in my films, both Secret City films.
Yeah.
Secret City, the Oak Ridge Story. So if you recognize him or know him from around town, here he is. So, but he's got, as Ray says, he's got a couple of unique stories about growing up in Oak Ridge, and that's what we wanted to talk about today.
Okay.
Let me say just a word about the Secret City films, and then Mick will get started. I want you to know, Keith, that those films are, I believe, making a bigger impression than any of us really realize. I've been asked a couple of times just in the last week about how to get the history of Oak Ridge into the school systems in the most effective ways. And interestingly enough, as I've told you before, and I'll just quickly say it here, if we get the teachers to watch that Secret City, the war years, and have the students to write down some questions that they'd like to ask the Oak Ridge historian, and then FaceTime me on the iPhone, that works like a champ. And we're considering how we might broaden that and get that in a more effective way than just chatting with me. Other thoughts that are tying into those documentary films, we're looking at ways to do virtual tours because the museums have been closed down, for weeks and months now.
Yeah.
So that video medium, and they're available. We have them online, and you can get to them easily. So I think that what you created back in 2006, 2007 is still among the most effective mediums that we have for communicating our history. Now,
I appreciate that, Ray. And many of the folks that are in that film are no longer with us.
Oh, you're
and
right.
It was a great way to capture their stories and for them to tell what happened to them. So
yeah, and of course, we have some 800 oral histories that are available to us as well. And you're right, we're losing those people. In fact, we've lost most all of the people who were original here to Oak Ridge. And if we hadn't captured them in the videos, the documentary films, and the oral histories, it'd be lost to us. And as I'm sure Mick will tell you, we want to continue that oral history tradition. And we're looking at a way out at the K-25 History Center to have that done. It'll have to prove itself as far as effectiveness, but we're not going to stop doing oral histories one way or the other. I think those are so important that we will continue doing them.
And people, Ray, are, you never know who you're going to run into. I went this past week. I had to drive to Raleigh, North Carolina, and shoot an interview with a couple for Carson Newman, a project I was doing for Carson Newman, and I got some background information. They met at Carson Newman years ago, and they're an elderly couple, and I was reading some background information about them, and I noticed that they were married in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And when I was talking to the woman, the woman of the couple, she says, yes. She says, I grew up in Oak Ridge. My dad worked on the project. And so Oak Ridge was her home. And there were a couple of times I asked her a question, and she said something to the effect, "Well, I don't reveal too much. I think I learned that from growing up in Oak Ridge." So
I thought you were going to say they were actually married at the chapel on the hill.
I don't know where they were married, but they were married in Oak Ridge. So
Okay, Keith, we've kept, or not Keith, Mick, we've kept you waiting long enough. Tell
yeah.
us, let's start into the story about your growing up in Oak Ridge, and tell
Okay.
us the story.
I'm always glad to talk about that. I feel very privileged to have grown up in Oak Ridge, a perfect small town and I think a perfect period of time. I was born in 1951 here in Oak Ridge, and I'm one of 5 kids. My dad was known as Red Wiest, red hair in the early days. My mom, Marie. And I think a good place to start is my ties to the Manhattan Project in early Oak Ridge. Mom and Dad were newlyweds up in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And Dad was he just graduated with a degree in chemical engineering. And as you know, there were recruiters going all over the country trying to grab engineers and scientists and people of all crafts. So they said, "You really need to take this war project down in Tennessee." They didn't use word Oak Ridge that early. So they packed up the car, the old Buick, and headed down here sight unseen, and spent their whole lives here. Dad spent his entire career, over 44 years, there at Y-12. And so they got their start, like many of these young couples. They would start with the efficiency apartment that maybe up on Tennessee Avenue. That's where they started. And then they went to a flat top. And then as the babies came, they needed more space. And where my earliest memories are in the Woodland community, because I was kid number 4. There was Bob, or Bobby, oldest, Tommy, Betty, me, and then Johnny. And by the time me and Johnny came along, they needed more space. So we were there in the Woodland. And I remember we spent a lot of time outside playing because, we didn't have a TV yet. TVs were just starting to come in to popularity, and when we finally did get one a few years later, it was a small black and white television. So we spent a lot of time outdoors playing games. Marbles, getting down in the dirt playing marbles was very popular. Mumbly peg, that's one where you get your pocket knife out. Every boy carried a pocket knife back then. And the goal was to flip the knife off, put the blade on your fingertip and flip it and stick it up in the ground. And so you went around in a circle having all these challenges. And so everybody knew who the best kid in the neighborhood playing mumbly peg. It wasn't me. But there were other games. A lot of the toys that we can go buy in the store today, you couldn't buy back then. So we would do things like take a pair of roller skates and build a go-kart, get a wooden apple crate and some boards, hammers, nails, and kind of put together your go-kart. And we would compete. We'd race them down the street. And of course, it kind of came down to who had the strongest legs, because they weren't motorized. They were just pushed along on skates. So that was one of the activities. Another was we would put these little skits on. We would create a stage of sorts. We'd run a rope between 2 trees and throw some quilts over it, and that was our curtain for a stage. We do a variety show, and of course the parents would come out, set up lawn chairs and such, and watch all of this. And I have memories of entertaining the neighborhood with those things. So it was kind of like Norman Rockwell's paintings in many ways. It was just Americana in a small town, and I really feel privileged to have grown up in that era.
That's good, Keith. I'm sorry, I keep calling Keith. I'll be all right, guys. Surely, Mick. That's an interesting. And not only do you have that experience in your background, uh, all of the people who were privileged to grow up here in Oak Ridge have similar experiences and share those kinds of things. Uh, tell
Yes.
Yeah, tell us about where you were when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened.
Okay. Well, I'll get to that in just a minute. But while I'm in that 50s era, I thought I ought to mention that growing up in Oak Ridge, you had a real sense of security because even though the gates were opened in 1949 and the city was open to the public, but everybody knew that your neighbor probably had a security clearance, so the crime rate was very low. There was no problem. People left their cars and their doors unlocked, and so it really was a safe place. You really felt that security. So that was another aspect. Uh, Another thing we would do at that age was to explore the underground Oak Ridge. We would go into the storm sewers.
Oh my!
I can remember going into the storm sewer up around Jackson Square, and it was dark, of course, pitch dark under there, and my flashlight went out on me, and I was having to just grope and feel my way. And for hours, I was down in that storm drain, and it would narrow down from it would be a 5-foot drain pipe to begin with. By the time I saw daylight, I was crawling on my hands and knees. But I popped up where Walgreens is today, over there on the Oak Ridge Turnpike. So I covered a couple miles underground. I didn't do that anymore. I learned a lesson. We kind of learned to make our own fun.
Yeah, let me interrupt just a second to tell you that there's a book out, Bones of Betrayal.
Yeah.
It was written by John Jefferson and Dr. Bill Bass. And when they were writing that book, they wanted me to give them a tour of Oak Ridge. John, now, not Dr. Bass. And we did. We found a place out around Y12 where they could write into their book about a murder that they wanted to tie back to the Manhattan Project. And he got excited about that underground. The book starts up at the Alexander Inn, the Alexander Guest House now, with a murder victim in the pool. But anyway, he got excited about that underground sewer system. And do you know that he went that route you just talked about? He actually went in that sewer system up at Jackson Square, and I believe he came out right down by the library, just a little further down than you did. But he used that in that book. So that's a unique experience. Some people told me you could ride a bicycle in that upper part. I don't know where
a short distance, maybe. Yeah. That they did a marvelous job building this city. The city planners, the storm drain system was very well done. One of the things that I like to compliment early Oak Ridge on was the planning of the streets, sidewalks in each neighborhood. They had a rounded curb between the street and the sidewalk, so you could easily ride your bicycle up to the sidewalk, back. Traffic was coming, you could get out of the way easily. Well, they don't do that anymore. Now subdivisions have that sharp squared curb and no sidewalk. So it was a pedestrian-friendly, a child-friendly environment. I know that.
Mick, one of the things that I don't know that we've mentioned this on this show or not is the names of the streets. Tell us about the names of the streets that's unique to Oak Ridge.
It's quite unique. You'll notice that all the main avenues are named after a university because we had people coming from all over the United States, and most of them were well-educated, college-educated. And so you'll see Rutgers and Vanderbilt and Princeton and all of these different universities, or you may see the state. You'll see like one of our main arteries through town is Illinois Avenue. And so it was probably someone from Illinois, University of Illinois may have promoted that. So the main roads are named in that manner.
And it's something unique about those state streets. I always heard that the state streets always lead back to the turnpike if you're in town and you get lost.
I think that is true, with maybe the exception of California or one or two, but for the most part, it'll get you back to the main drag. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a very well planned city in many respects. We had 92 dormitories, those big, large 2-story dormitories that held many people, and they were all named after cities. And if you go down the turnpike today and you see Cheyenne Ambulatory, people may say, Cheyenne, what in the heck? Here in East Tennessee, they named that after an Indian tribe out west. Well, Cheyenne, Wyoming. There was a Cheyenne Hall. One of the dormitories was there on the turnpike. Charlotte Hall was right next to it, which both of those got demolished, and DOE sold the property to the hospital. The hospital decided to keep the name Cheyenne. So it may make people scratch their head and wonder how that came about, but there's a story behind it.
Yeah. Well, let's get to you being a paper boy.
Yes, when I was about 11 years old, I got my brother's paper out. It started with Bob. He passed the paper out down to Tom. He passed it to me. It was an Knoxville News Sentinel, so we were delivering papers every day. And then I passed it on to John later on. So it was in the Wiest boys had that route for a long time. And but I can remember clearly looking at the headlines and would read the paper with interest when it was a crisis going on. And the one that stands out for Oak Ridge would be 1963, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And there was a tension across the town. My parents didn't talk about it much, but then we were used not to talking about issues. Dad, he was a man of few words anyway, but you didn't ask him about his job. You didn't ask what they were doing out there at the Y-12 plant. But we knew that we were involved in nuclear weapons. We were a target of the missiles coming into Cuba. Cuba, communist country, a puppet state of the Soviet Union, it was getting very dangerous situation, and so President Kennedy was in a tight spot. He had to decide what he was going to do, and eventually it led to a blockade. But in the meantime, we found out that those missiles could reach Oak Ridge. If they were fired from Cuba, they could actually reach this far. And so we were wondering, are we on the verge of World War III? And so it was a great relief when that Cuban Missile Crisis came to a close.
And you remember that, but you remember seeing that on the front page of the newspaper that you were delivering.
Yes, I did. And so we kept up very closely with that issue. And at that time, there was a lot of concern about communism in the world. And it was about that time that Vietnam became a big issue. North and South Vietnam were opposed, and the United States got involved, as we know.
I just want to mention, since I'm a movie guy, if people want to learn more about the Cuban Missile Crisis, there's a great film that came out a few years ago called 13 Days. And it is about, stars Kevin Costner's in it, and it's a historical narrative film about the White House and what happened. It's fairly accurate as far as what really happened. Of course, it's Hollywood, so they make it more cinematic by adding, different stories to it. But for informational purposes, it's a really good film that talks about the Cuban Missile Crisis and the role that the United States played in that. So,
yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking about growing up in Oak Ridge, another activity we were involved in. We were fortunate to have the Oak Ridge Sportsman's Club right down the road, which had one of the longest outdoor ranges, shooting range anywhere around. I think in the longest in in the eastern United States. But as kids, we were involved in the marksmanship program, where every Saturday morning we'd go out there and we would compete with our 22 rifles, and we would earn our medals. And I must say, my sister Betty could outshoot all of us boys. She was a crack shot, got more of the medals and ribbons than we did. But we were involved in that largely because my dad was the only gunsmith in town in the early days. He started his little business there in the garage that he and my grandfather built, and it grew into a family business. So when people heard the name Wiest, they thought gunsmith, most of them, even though his regular job was a chemical engineer out at Y-12. So
the Sportsman's Club is still active and still going strong, because I live not too far from it, and every Saturday morning I can sit out on my back porch and hear gunshots. Yes. and I know that's where it's coming from.
Yes.
So
yes. Yeah, just also like to mention the sports. There were plenty of sports available to kids growing up in Oak Ridge. I played basketball there for St. Mary's School. Dr. DePercio was our coach. And we have the distinction of only 1 year did we have a football team at St. Mary's. It was in the 7th grade. We had a perfect record. We had 0 wins. We lost every game, and that's probably why we didn't have a football team the next year. There was only that 1 year. But I remember going up to Jefferson Junior High and playing under Coach Nick Orlando, and he's an icon to this day for Oak Ridgers. Short, stocky guy, always had a big grin, and he's famous for his paddle. You couldn't do that today, of course, pop somebody, even though he popped them lightly on the rear end. He would, it became almost a rite of passage. If you had a birthday, he'd call you out in front of the PE class, and he'd give you that little pop, and you felt like you had been awarded something. So, but Nick, he was a heck of a football coach. We went 13-0, undefeated under Nick in about 1966 era. And so those guys were like father figures to me. Another one, Coach Buddy Pope. He was fantastic individual. I never heard him come out with a cuss word. The worst he would ever say was, "Dad, Jimmit." Yeah, that was one of his favorite expressions. But he was a father figure.
Nick, let me interrupt real quick. You're talking about Nick Orlando, and I believe this is accurate because I had 2 boys that were in the high school band, so I went to some high school football games. Even today, over at a home high school football game in Oak Ridge, you will hear the announcer say something to the effect of, "Nick Orlando, please report to the press box," or something like that. That they do that every game.
Yes, you're right.
As a tribute to him.
I think that's a great tradition to keep with. I like that. Yeah, so sports were very important, still is, to Oak Ridge. Blankenship Field is like sacred ground up there. So
why don't we move on to the Oak Ridge Heritage and Preservation Association just a little bit?
Okay.
I know you were instrumental in really starting that organization.
Right.
Yes, and I didn't want time to run out without me mentioning that I met my my lovely wife, Terry, in high school at Oak Ridge High. Terry Campbell, we met in high school and began dating, and so we've been together a long time. I grabbed her early, and I was lucky, man, to do so. So, but yes, the Oak Ridge Heritage and Preservation Association. And back in 1999, I just graduated. I went back to school at UT, got my master's with a focus on land use planning and historic preservation. Well, after getting that degree, I wondered, well, I really ought to do something with this. DOE was just getting into this land use planning process, and I also was a little frustrated, and some others in town were frustrated that there was a lot of demolition going on, but no preservation of our early buildings. So in September of 1999, I called the first meeting, and another icon person that helped make it go, Bobby Martin, was there from the very beginning, and is still the secretary of the organization today. So some of the others are no longer with us, who we had. So the focus was we wanted to keep preservation in our name because there was not much happening there. Our city had no preservation plan. To this day, they have no preservation plan. We're trying to work with the city to develop that. So we feel like if you can't walk up and touch a building or structure or go through a doorway and feel you're walking in the steps of some of those greats that history's greats that were here, then you're really missing something. You know, the maps and charts and visuals are all great, but having something you can reach out and touch is a must if you're going to preserve your history. And as you folks know, Oak Ridge has a very unique history. So we want to try to preserve it in every way. The ORHPA, as we call it, the Oak Ridge Heritage and Preservation Association, got started in 1999. And remember back then we had an annual festival called Mayfest. Well, we kept promoting that, hey, let's talk more about our history, and we worked with the city, and it developed into the Secret City Festival. And it really is quite popular. I hope that continues in its popularity. We're in a difficult time now with gatherings and such, but hopefully we can return to the days of our big festival. But one of the focuses of our heritage group was giving a preservation award to those owners of properties that were doing a good job preserving an early Oak Ridge structure. So we started that around the year 2000 or 2001, and we've continued that every year. We've recognized a different owner or manager of a property.
Mick, it'd be a good time now if you can, just off the top of your head. I know you'll remember who you gave it to last year. Just
Yes.
mention a couple of the places that have been recipients of that award.
Okay, I can remember the first one we gave was to Lawrence Tennell, who had the Tennell building there on the Turnpike. Then we gave it to, in fact, on that same day, our group, our committee, we stood there for the presentation, got our photos, and then we ran across the Turnpike to the other side is the Red Cross building, and we gave them the award on that same year. Sometimes we'll give 2 awards. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the early ones. Last year, we gave our award to the Oak Ridge swimming pool. The outdoor pool has been there from the very beginning of Oak Ridge. It was a farm pond before Oak Ridge came. You'll see pictures of cattle standing out there. So it was an important feature. We're lucky to have that pool. I might mention that that pool is endangered right now, and that the city is concerned. They're not bringing in enough revenue for that facility to pay for itself. So we need to help find ways to keep the pool and keep it viable. It's something that all Oak Ridgers are proud about. And that's one of the
Mick, on the pool, I read something just in the last couple of weeks that said that pool was one of the 10 largest pools where in the United States or the
United States. We used to say it was the largest in the South. Of course, the South were known for their pools, you know, and got warmer weather. But I don't know if it's ever been documented, but yes, I would believe it's in the top 10.
Yeah,
sure.
Absolutely.
So I say we, the Heritage Group, our purpose behind the Preservation Award is to encourage people to take care of these properties and make sure they have a future. Another one that I'll mention quickly is the Noah building. It's on the main drag there on Illinois Avenue next to Ben Franklin Motors. That's been there since the very early days. It was a health department. It was also an emergency hospital during the war. and it's quite very much original. We've given our award to them. The U.S. Department of Commerce now owns that building, and they would like to eventually move somewhere where they have more space. So there's an opportunity for us to turn that over to a new user and continue to use the building. It'd be a great one to preserve.
I think it'd be a good location for the Manhattan Project National Historical Park.
That's been talked about. We have actually mentioned that to the superintendent for the park, and we hope that will happen.
That'd be a great location. I mean, they're at the Children's Museum now, but that's a little bit out of the way for people, and that's just right as that's very visible as people come into town from Knoxville. It would be right there. So
that's true.
So you do that in September of each year, I believe. So you all are getting ready to do that this year, right?
That's correct. We usually hand that gift out, award it on September the 19th. We picked that date because history will tell you that's when General Groves selected this area to be what became Oak Ridge. We were the first site of the Manhattan Project to break ground. So he selected this September 19th, 1942, and very quickly surveyors came in and started preparing for construction, which really kicked off in early 1943. So that was our beginnings. The ORHPA was the first group to really recognize that as Oak Ridge's birthday. Even though people will say, well, we became a city in 1959. Yes, that's when we incorporated. But it's good to preserve what we know about the early years.
Before we leave those early years, do you remember and were you at the gate opening?
No,
Okay.
I didn't, but that might have been the day that my oldest brother wandered off and got lost, and it was written up in the Oak Ridger about, and I think it was Bill Wilcox who helped my brother get home. Everybody knows the famous Bill Wilcox, but it's funny, you know, when you have 5 kids to take care of, one of them's going to wander off once in a while. It may have been during that. It was a huge celebration, but I was up.
I can see how your family might have been distracted.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know, it was, and this is a good opportunity. I'm going to put Mick on the spot here for just a second. Mick, you know, I made a film for ORHPA about the opening of the gates. Yeah. And as far as I know, it is not available online. I would like to see that be made available online. It's been years, and you know, we don't hardly do DVDs anymore. And if people want to buy one, I'm sure they're available there at the Down Community Center. But there are people all over the country that wouldn't have an opportunity to buy one that we need to show that movie to. So
is the title of that Open Sesame?
Yes,
Open Sesame.
And excellent film. I will get with you, Keith, and let's make that happen. You're right. We ought to make that available.
We just need to put it up on YouTube. And
yeah, I can put it up on YouTube and publicize the link, and everybody can just send that out. I did the very same thing with Clinton 12. So it went for years without being online, and I had so many educators emailing me, especially this year during the pandemic when so much education was taking place online. They were like, is there a link that we use this in our class? Is there a link that I can use? So I got permission to do that. And I think that'd be a great thing to do. So,
and you did that Open Sesame for ORHPA. So Mick, you can give him the permission to do that.
Well, Keith was kind enough to give us the video, and we've been selling that for years. It's not, you know, as you would expect, we don't sell a lot of these products. I'd be more than happy to see Keith get that out for many people to enjoy.
Well,
very good.
Right. You talk to your people and give me the word, and we'll make that happen. So
yes, that would be great. And Keith, you mentioned the Clinton 12. You did a marvelous job on that story. Oak Ridge has its own story about desegregation. You may have just seen this week in the proclamation the city of Oak Ridge did about the Oak Ridge 85. Those young students, 85 of them that started these going to the white schools in 1955 and kind of broke that barrier. That really took a lot of courage for those kids. I know that they put up with some abuse over it. There would be a story for you to develop, Keith, if you probably got plenty of projects going, but there's another video.
I'm always looking for a good story. I'm
Yeah.
always looking for a good story.
So we need to say just a little more about that event that's going to celebrate those 85 coming into Oak Ridge, desegregation for Oak Ridge. That's going to happen over the September 4, 5, and 6 dates. That the activities are being finalized now. Benita Albert has written a story for Historically Speaking that should come out the first part of that week about Archie Lee, who is one of those 85. And I've also been talking, Keith, with Rose Weaver and Martin McBride and John Spradlin, 3 of the people who are on the committee that's put all this together. And I believe they're going to be able to work in a time for at least one of them to be on our next Hidden History program. Okay. So we're trying to finalize that now. But I agree, that event that's coming up on just 2 weeks from now, it's going to be a huge event in the city. They're going to be putting some historical markers up in the schools. Not only are they doing this particular weekend event, I've been contacted by Martin McDaniel, who's going to, principal of Oak Ridge High School, who's going to have some events throughout the year that will continually celebrate that desegregation for this 65th anniversary. So it is a huge event. We need to do all we can to capture and to promote something as significant. And you always get into this contest about talking about, was it the first?
Was it the first?
Actually, it was not. There were a couple of schools in Arkansas. There was a private school in Nashville, but it was among the first. It was actually the first, and you can't even call it a public school because the Atomic Energy Commission was actually funding the school. It didn't get any state funds. Yeah. But I would contend that it is the first public school that was desegregated in 1955.
On a large scale, yeah.
Yeah, that was one of that was always a bone of contention with the Clinton 12. And I always said, the Clinton 12 was the first public school to be integrated as a result of the Brown versus Board of Education decision. Yeah. And so, they were the first ones to do that. They weren't the first in Anderson County because Oak Ridge was.
Right, and you have to realize that same decision in 1954 is what made the Atomic Energy Commission make that decision to integrate Oak Ridge. And there's a huge story there about Waldo Kahn, who was who was chairman of the city council at that time.
Right.
And he got in. I have a letter that he wrote to Senator or to Howard Baker. I think he's Congressman Baker at the time. His Senator Howard Baker's dad wrote to him that said he's got a tempest in a teapot down here. That there's some people that are upset at him because he's trying to integrate Oak Ridge and integrate the school.
And there were businesses that refused to integrate and caused a lot of trouble. I think it's an important piece of Oak Ridge history. We try to tell that story at the Oak Ridge History Museum, which is down there on the corner of the Turnpike and Robertsville Road near Kroger's there. That's one of the buildings, by the way, that we were able to preserve. It was originally known as the Midtown Community Center. Right. But right now, that museum is closed like many other businesses, but we look ahead to opening that soon. We hope people will come down and look at that display we have on desegregation.
Well,
Keith,
go ahead.
if I can insert, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Nothing. Go ahead, Ray.
All right. If I can insert a hidden history story here about integration in Oak Ridge, the mayor of Oak Ridge and the Reverend, the preacher who was up at the chapel on the hill, they got together and decided that it would be good if, now this is in the 60s, okay, this is after 1955 had happened, but they were continuing to try and integrate Oak Ridge over the years. And they decided that the Davis Brothers Cafeteria would be an excellent place to integrate. And so they decided to go to Atlanta and meet with the Davis Brothers. They did. They flew down there, had a meeting with them, and when they brought up the subject of integrating the restaurants, the Davis brothers, both of them, were adamant that is not going to happen in our restaurants. Just essentially escorted those two gentlemen out of their office, wouldn't listen to them. Now, the mayor was a little bit temperamental, so he was really angry on the way back to the hotel, and or not to the hotel, on the way back to the airport. He was just raving about how awful they'd been treated. Well, they got on the airplane, and one of them sat on the windows on one side and the other one on the window on the other side, right across the aisle from one another. And they were still carrying on this conversation about this meeting. And a young man sitting beside the preacher said, "Where are you all from?" And he told them to Oak Ridge, and just led right into why they were in Atlanta and what the problem was and how they were trying to integrate the restaurants there, and they were making no progress. Well, they got back home, and in about a day or two, less than a week, the preacher got a call from a lawyer, Gene Joyce, and said, "You need to come to my office." And it was just across the street up at Jackson Square. So he went down there. When he went in, Gene said, "I got something to tell you." He said, "The Davis brothers are going to integrate their restaurant." He said, "You got to be kidding." He said, "No, that's right." He said, "What has happened is that young man that was beside you on the airplane is Guilford Glazier's son." And he went back and told Guilford Glazier what was going on. And Glazier called the Davis brothers and said, "Look, you all own or have a restaurant there in my downtown shopping center, and you also have a bowling alley." Now, the restaurant was doing real good, and the bowling alley was not doing as good, wasn't making as much money. But he said, "If you'll integrate your restaurant, I'll relieve you of the rent responsibilities for the rest of your contract on the bowling alley." Now, that was I believe $6,000 a year, and they had 8 years to go on it. So $48,000 is what he gave them. And they did, in fact, not only integrate the Davis brothers in Oak Ridge, they integrated all of the Davis brothers restaurants in the South. And they were the head of the Restaurant Association for the South at the time, and had a huge influence on integrating restaurants across the South in the 1960s.
Wow.
So there's your Guilford Glazier story.
That's a great story. We need to do one of these shows just about Guilford Glazier.
I agree. There's
I remember clearly when downtown came to be in 1955. You know, you remember every little part of Oak Ridge had their own little neighborhood where you could walk to, and you'd have your grocery and your barbershop and so forth. But we had no real central downtown until 1955 when the downtown shopping center came to be. So I lived very close. I could walk there or ride my bike there. We saw it develop over time. Downtown Hardware was one of the first to open there. Yep. And then along came Woolworth. Yeah, it was the place to be, the place to meet with your friends.
I remember, Mick, I grew up in Kingston, and I was born in 57. So in the 60s, whenever we would, and there were 4 of us kids, you know, on Friday night, Mom and Dad would pile us in the Impala, and we'd come to Oak Ridge, or Saturday afternoon, we'd come to Oak Ridge, and we'd walk around the downtown shopping center. That was the first shopping center that I ever went to. So
I
Yeah,
bet
it's
you
got a lot of great memories.
remember the carnival that downtown
Mhm.
would put on in the summertime. The visiting traveling carnival, I think you called it Funland or something,
Yeah.
would show up and put up their Ferris wheel and everything, and that was a big draw.
It was.
Yeah.
Well, Mick, thank you so much. Ray, do you have something else before we?
I would only add one more thought. The downtown Oak Ridge area, now Main Street Oak Ridge, with the American Museum of Science and Energy located there on the corner where what I remember the old Sears location, but Mick, you'll remember an earlier store that was there, I imagine.
There was an A&P down there that was a prime grocery store that everybody visited.
Yeah.
So that area with Wilson Street and they just had a toast of the town there last night, promoting that area as the new downtown. With the museum there and the things that are happening, I hope to see a revival of the central downtown, and the memories that you all have talked about are well and good, but I think there's more to be said and done in downtown Oak Ridge as it continues to develop over the years. And I want to add just one more thought. I just last night found a copy of the February the 22nd issue, 1945 issue of the Oak Ridge Journal. And Mick, do you know in that Oak Ridge Journal, in February 22nd, 1945, is when they started naming the dormitories. They were numbered up until then. And then they announced in the paper that they were going to start putting names on them. And they list the entire, you said 92, I believe. Yeah. The entire list is in that newspaper of all of the names of all of the dormitories. I had never found that before. So there's your reference. If you ever want to know the names of the dormitories, they were published in the Oak Ridge Journal on February the 22nd, 1945. Two other things I found in that paper, Keith. One was Wally Fowler and the Georgia Clodhoppers, which evolved into the Oak Ridge Boys, named for the city of Oak Ridge, were scheduled to be there on February the 24th, that's Saturday, and they were entertaining kids at the Grove Theater. Now, that was advertised in there.
Yeah.
And then I can't get by without saying one more thing that was in there. Mick, you talked about the crime or the lack of crime in Oak Ridge. This little blurb in the paper right beside Wally Fowler and the dormitories talked about 52 bus drivers getting arrested by the FBI because they were skimming off the top. The people were paying to ride the bus, and they were not turning in everybody that was paying. They were keeping some of that money. They were skimming it off the top. So the Army called in the FBI to investigate, and they arrested 52 of them. I remember they had 850 buses here. It was a huge system. And them old bus drivers, it was just too tempting. I mean, all they had to do was every time somebody give them $3, they'd take one, put in their pocket. That's
true. That is true. All right. Well, what a show today. Thank you so much, Mick and Ray, for your stories. And
Mick, we really do appreciate you being here. I enjoy being the historian, don't get me wrong, but you lived it. You understand, and you can tell it from a way that those of us who didn't grow up here can't do. So we really do appreciate your story.
I want to thank you both for putting this out there for people to enjoy. I think the more we can spread what a great town we've got, then we'll get the word out.
Yeah. All right. Good deal. Thank you so much. All right. And folks, thanks for watching. We appreciate it.
And I'll remind us again, now we got guests that come on regularly, and we hope to have someone on next week that'll be talking to us about the integration of Oak Ridge. But we also have some lined up. Don Bell's going to come, and Don grew up in Oak Ridge and has some good stories too. We've got him lined up in the future, and we're going to get other people to come on and be guests on their show. So
we sure are.
Thank you again, Mick.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.